crypto, what did we call it? The crypto metaverse private spaceflight panel. You're in the right place. I think we're going to get started. I'm Tom Foster. I'm the editor-at-large of Inc. magazine, and really delighted to be here with Steve Scherr, who is the Chief Business Officer of Neva. If you don't know anything about Neva, I'm guessing you do if you're here. Fascinating company, which we'll get into a little bit, how Neva is taking on none other than Google in search. But what we're really going to focus a lot of this talk on is Steve's journey to Neva, which is sort of a counterintuitive journey, beginning at a legacy media company, one of the largest legacy media companies, leading to Amazon, where he led Prime, worldwide consumer marketing, various other not insignificant functions within Amazon for many years, and then to this very small, very new startup taking on, one of the biggest challenges you could imagine taking on. Really fascinating journey, and it actually makes perfect sense when you hear Steve talk about it. And there are a lot of lessons that I think we can draw from sort of large organizations to small and vice versa. So that's what we're going to try to get to, and we will have time for questions at the end. They did not put microphones in here, so just get your vocal cords ready. We're going to just ask people to kind of shout out questions when we get to that portion at the end. But Steve, welcome.
Thanks so much, Tom. I hope folks can hear. It's great to be here. It's nice to meet you in person. And as Tom said, I'm Steve, and the discussion today will be structured, I guess, around whatever questions that Tom asked me, but also around my path to Neva. But I'm going to really work to make sure that the point of it is to give you some insight into what the differences between these kind of large companies are and the spaces in which they operate and the ethos and approach that's required in a startup. So it's been fascinating for me, and hopefully it will be instructive for you.
Great, great. Well, let's just jump right in with sort of the beginning of the journey that we're talking about. You, prior to, 2006 or so, were for quite a while working at one of the largest, most influential sort of legacy media companies, Time Inc. And I'm curious if you can just kind of talk a little bit about what you were doing there and how that informed, sort of the beginning of the journey that ultimately brought you to where you are now.
Great. Well, I started out, as you said, in the publishing business coming out of college. I was always fascinated by journalism and magazines, but I decided that I wanted to go into the business side of it, and so I joined an organization called Consumer Marketing within Time Incorporated, which in those days, magazines were a really meaningful thing. We were the publishers of Time and Sports Illustrated and People, Fortune, of course, had been the publisher of Life magazine, so those sorts of big American media institutions. Consumer marketing is the sale of those magazines to consumers, not the ads within the magazines, but the subscriptions and the newsstand copies that people buy to read them. And that was kind of the beginning of a lifetime of subscription management. So I worked in that space on a bunch of those magazines, including the launch of Entertainment Weekly. And we sold subscriptions through old kind of pre-internet conventional response marketing ways, direct mail campaigns and the little cards that fell out of the magazines, et cetera. And it was great training.
Some of those things still exist.
Yeah, they do.
Strangely enough.
Yes, I know.
I see them in my career.
Yes, I would imagine. But the kind of the entry point here is that as a consumer marketer, I was always involved in of course, what we were marketing, and that product in these cases were these terrific magazines that had extraordinary journalists working on them and an incredible amount of investment, and we were selling them to customers who were buying them, who at that point were buying them for their own interest, but also were largely unaware of the shadow economy that existed in selling them to the advertisers that read those magazines. So those magazines, despite being great consumer products on their own, were really supported by the ads that ran in them. The power in that relationship was held by Ford and General Motors and Coca-Cola and whoever was buying those huge ad spreads.
They essentially give away those subscriptions, right? I mean, they pay for the direct marketing campaign and don't really make any money on them.
A couple of the magazines that I had the good fortune to work on were quite profitable consumer enterprises. People in Sports Illustrated, because their weekly magazines could charge $50 or in those days $100 to subscribe, but monthly magazines more typically that are more focused for advertisers on a narrower subject were often $12, which barely recoup the cost of mailing the letters.
A lot of which is analogous to the thing you hear today, which is like if it's free, the product is you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you're there. At a certain point, I want to say it's around 2006, you decide to leave that, not just that company, but that whole industry, and accept a job at Amazon. I'm curious if you can, let's talk about sort of the moment that led you to make that decision and make that transformation. What were the forces that you sort of recognized that led you to believe it was time, and then let's start talking about Amazon.
Well, I was fascinated by what was going on, the transformation in the world economy through the internet, and I wanted to participate in it. But the insight was that those media really had real difficulty competing in the new world. If you look back to a world in which magazines, again, it feels kind of hard to imagine a world in which the internet didn't exist, but magazines all of a sudden were challenged on all fronts. And I had I think the good luck of working for at that time, the last 5 years of my career at Time, I was working for a specialty arm of that publisher where we were publishing things like Golf Magazine and Field and Stream and Popular Science and This Old House. These were narrower and less, maybe $10 to $15 subscription magazines. And in those cases, we found that we just couldn't keep up with the free media that was available, or the seemingly free media that was available in the internet. And we also couldn't prove that the ads in those magazines were actually moving product for users. Compared to Google and others who were providing pay-per-click advertising, there was, when you're trying to get a big company to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on advertising pages that they can't actually, confirm that was doing anything, it was very difficult.
If you can't show that your ads are effective, that's probably a problem for your ad business.
Yeah. So I said I need to change, and I just got extremely lucky that kind of matched up with Amazon in that day. So because I had this subscription background, and that was something they were looking for.
So all right, so subscription, Amazon, that means Prime.
Yeah.
And 2006, I don't remember exactly the history of Prime, but this was right as Prime was launching. I mean, that had to be a really interesting moment. Let's rewind to that moment in Amazon's history. Amazon was a really different beast in 2006 than it is today. It had not eaten the world at that point, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
It was still a large company at the time. I began talking to Amazon in the fall of 2005. Prime had launched in the late spring or summer of 2005. As interestingly, it's hard to imagine Prime not being ubiquitous, but when I was contacted by the recruiter from Amazon, I had never heard of Prime. It did exist, but I had never heard of it, and most people hadn't. And the whole notion that one would subscribe to a shipping service was entirely new. But for me, it was a coming together of my desire to be in a very different space with a company that was far more forward-looking and would allow me to bring the experience that I had to bring to bear on a different industry. And so I joined in 2006. We had, at the time when I arrived, we had fewer than 100,000 members of Prime, and it was a tiny little team. There were 10 people within Amazon working on Prime, so I arrived and I was the first real leader of it, more senior leader of it. And built it for a number of years. It was extremely gratifying.
There's an interesting contrast there that I think, contrast between, all right, you've got a magazine company. Magazines, people are used to, at that point, people were used to subscribing to magazines. I don't think they are anymore. But you're sort of trying to extend an existing behavior in that context. With something like Prime, as you just said, here was a product that people didn't really understand. I guess people were members of Costco or something, but this wasn't really framed that way. This was framed, as you said, as a shipping service, which was an entirely new idea. Yeah. How does that differ when you're thinking about trying to sort of create subscription behavior for something entirely new?
Well, I think that the lesson of Prime is actually a little bit different because Amazon at that time, for instance, had $9 billion in revenue from the prior 12 months before I arrived. So it was a substantial business, and Jeff Bezos had been Times Man of the Year, and it was a thing, and there were a lot of customers, and so we were able to market Prime in a very transactional way. So instead of having to teach people at a very high level what it would be like to subscribe to a shipping service, you had hundreds of thousands, millions of people going through checkout and buying with the old shipping, and an opportunity to explain to them that if they were to subscribe, they would get a transformative experience. The other thing that it can be hard to think of these days, if you look back on it, if you have any memory of it, is that there was just an extraordinary difference between the shipping expectation in those days on internet shopping versus what Prime was offering. The expectation was 2 weeks of delivery. That was standard. And so Prime, which now people kind of take for granted, was offering 2 days, and while you could buy 2-day shipping, people had in their mind that was a $20 value. So when you could subscribe for $79 and get it unlimited, and in fact that day, the thing you were ordering, if you were just to take a free trial of this shipping service, you could get it tomorrow or the next day, that was a really unbeatable offer. The point is, there's a difference between marketing and changing people's perception and kind of getting people to think about something entirely different versus getting someone to make a transactional decision at that moment that is really helpful to them and then building from there.
So I want to come back to that then when we start talking about
Sure.
Neva, because there's, as you're suggesting, there's a whole other level of sort of behavior change that
Yeah.
one can try to create, which I think you're trying to do now,
That's what we
right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your journey at Amazon. So we talked about you get there, you're helping stand up Prime from basically nothing. Where does your journey go there? You were in several different roles over quite a few years at Amazon, working closely with Bezos and.
I did. I was in a bunch of things, and this is another example of some of the differences between large companies and small companies. Amazon itself, I think, is a quite insular place. People hear a lot about it, and it's all in the news these days, and everyone has some sort of a perception of what it might be like. But it's a company that has the belief in the people, in its own culture, and the people there, so they're willing to take, and able, because of the scale, to take chances on people doing things that they haven't done before. So I was asked to take over the consumer marketing function, which was the traffic generation function for Amazon about a year and a half in. And so I had Prime reporting to me on all of the consumer marketing function. And I was frankly offered that role because I had been successful in Prime and I was a known quantity. And I also had a marketing background from magazines, but I was not an online marketer. I had not done search engine marketing or affiliate marketing or email marketing really, and search engine optimization, and yet I was an Amazon leader, and so I took that over. I ran the consumer marketing business at Prime, which is really at Amazon, global consumer marketing, which is really a technology operation. It's building all the platforms that allow Amazon to advertise and participate at scale in all those channels. I ran that organization for a total of 11 years, and loved it, and learned a great deal. And that's where, actually, in those days is when I first met the founder of Neva, Sridhar Ramaswamy, who was at Google at the time, and Amazon was a very large advertiser on Google, and so we ran across one another. So it was a terrific time. We launched a bunch of things. Also, super proud of, I just mentioned parenthetically, we launched a business called Amazon Smile, which still exists today, which is a way that people can come to Amazon and designate a portion of what they spend on charity. So it's a lot of different things that were kind of traffic generation related as well. So
Yeah. Okay, so you're doing all of that. At a certain point, you leave Amazon. What role were you in when you got to the point at Amazon where you decided it was time to move on? Because that was fairly recently.
I ran the consumer marketing organization through about 5 years prior. about 5 years ago. I spent 3 years after that in supply chain, in the inbound supply chain operations. So Amazon has this very sophisticated technology-based means of acquiring all the products that come into the fulfillment centers and then get shipped to people. And I had just decided I wanted to try to apply the things I had learned as a leader and a manager of product and technology, builder, to a space where I just had no knowledge. And it was really, that for me, was a really important transition point. It was like to get out of my comfort zone. I've been selling things to people, consumers, for 30 years at that point. And so I wanted to try something that was completely unrelated, that Amazon was particularly sophisticated in. And again, I benefited from this big company thing where they had enough people who were really expert in supply chain technology that they could put someone who had no knowledge of supply chain technology in charge of it, or not in the entirety of it, but the inbound side of it. And I learned a great deal there, and I worked for that in 3 years, including the beginnings of the pandemic, in which our systems were so strained, trying to figure out how to keep toilet paper and sanitizers, et cetera, in stock in those early days with no one in person, and labor in the fulfillment centers variable, et cetera.
So I find that surprising. I think of, in startups, we talk a lot about, how people need to be kind of Swiss Army knives, right? Like they need to be able to do a little bit of everything. But if I'm hearing you right, I mean, you're sort of saying there's a really rich role for people in extremely large organizations like Amazon who are essentially generalists.
Yeah.
And does that work outside of the, I mean, I find that counterintuitive. Does that work outside of the sort of the leadership realm? Is it that, like, in fact, you are a specialist in being a good leader? Or is it actually that in large organizations like this, there is a lot of room for lateral movement and sort of
I think it's
pursuing different paths?
I think it cuts across. My experience is specific to Amazon, but I can't imagine it would be different at other really large organizations. A software development manager or leader at any level is a pretty fungible leader. Person is expected to be able to learn spaces from, deep back-end stuff to, Alexa, front end. People move around all the time. Software developers themselves, marketers, et cetera. So yeah, there's a lot of movement.
So by the time you...
But
yeah.
really, really important to note is I think the thing that enables that movement is not like that Amazon is somehow better and more insightful. It's just that when you're in any one of those roles, you come in and you've got 10, 15, 20, even in more junior roles, you're going to have 20 or 30 people working for you, and they all know what they're doing already, right? So they can live with kind of bringing you along and teaching you and getting this cross-pollination of ideas and the things that you bring from your own history. And so it does work, but it's not because they're better. It's just because they have that luxury of scale. There is a luxury of scale.
So let's build on that for a second, because I think that scale comes with scale, with a lot of people. And you've been in sort of senior leadership positions at a couple of extremely large companies. Amazon at this point, I'm not sure exactly what the number is of people who were sort of under your fiefdom at Amazon, but I'm guessing thousands. How did you, was that a new skill? How do you sort of learn to lead at that kind of scale?
Well, I only led it at a very large scale for a year.
What was that scale?
For the last year I was at Amazon, I ran the support organization, the global support organization for Amazon Web Services, and also the global IT organization for Amazon. Another example of something I had really no connection to, and that was a total of 12,000 people.
Wow.
And so that's my roles prior to that had been largely in the 700 max range.
So what is the difference between leading 600 and 12,000?
Well, 600
people?
You can know a little bit about almost everyone. Like most of the people in the organization, it's like going to a small school. You don't know everyone closely, but like you kind of recognize faces and they know you and they see you in person, et cetera. with 12,000, that breaks. You can't. You have to lead by, when you're leading, you're obviously, like in all these cases, you're leading through your leaders, and you're empowering people who work for you, and they're leading huge organizations as well. And but when you're actually engaging with the entirety of the organization, it's more in kind of grand gestures. It's in recorded speeches or in through policies and presentations and Q&As and things like that. It's not as much. The vast majority of the people who interact with you in a public setting rather than in a one-on-one setting. And you have to just acknowledge that and know that those settings are really important.
Yeah. How many people work for Amazon overall?
Well, it's over 1 million.
Wow.
But you have to differentiate between the folks who work in there are a lot of people who work
fulfillment centers and
fulfillment centers
Yeah.
at all levels. But I think we were about I think there were about 6,000 when I joined. So
Wow.
I knew
6,000
total people
in the company.
And
now it's over 1 million.
Yeah, and so it was really different, right? Amazon has this thing called the old fart tool, which tells you what percentage of the population at Amazon at any given time you were hired before. And so when I left, I was at 99.9 something.
Wow.
But there's still plenty of people ahead of me.
You joined
it's just a very large
6,000 people, and you were at 99%. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so an organization with 1 million people, you worked closely with Jeff Bezos. I'm curious, just from that experience, what did you absorb from his leadership style of an organization, growing that fast to that sort of hard to comprehend scale?
Well, people always talk about Jeff because he's a celebrity, but within Amazon, like any other large company, there are other really, really important players who are just as visible, and so it's hard to describe it without talking about other great leaders like Jeff Wilke, who ran the consumer organization, and Angie Jassy, who's now the CEO. All of those people were very planful. I was in a bunch of meetings in early days, and there were lots of discussion about how critical it was going to be as we scaled, because we knew we were going to maintain the culture, to do the things that would allow us to become an organization at enormous scale that was still fundamentally different from the broken, what we consider to be the broken kind of day two cultures that were about bureaucracy and slow decision making that existed in legacy companies. So it was, in some sense, it was just this notion that, like, hey, we have to take this seriously. We can't just let it happen. In terms of Jeff's own leadership, he was always a very personal leader. Like, when you see him talk, it's often his stories about himself, about how he feels, et cetera, and what his own experience is. He's very transparent, and he asks of his audience that they absorb and engage with him on complicated topics. And he also is very, very purposeful about making sure that you can ask him any question, and he will answer it, but you have to accept that you might not like the answer he's going to give you. And I've always respected that. I also watched Jeff Wilke scale from being the head of operations to being also a very, very visible public person. And again, it's just practice and willingness to work and get better at things. All these things you can get better at.
I mean, you talk about having to be ready to not like the answer necessarily. And there's a somewhat famous story. There's a book about Amazon called The Everything Store that a guy named Brad Stone wrote, a Bloomberg guy. It was a good book. And there's sort of a famous story that involves you that I think first appeared in that book that I'm thinking of when you're talking about that it can be difficult working for somebody like that. Are you willing to share that story a little bit? I mean, or maybe another one. It seems like an interesting window into sort of like difficult moments.
Well,
with somebody like
I think any business that is as successful as Amazon is, or Neva aspires to be, is made better by direct communication and open and honest, and sometimes confrontational communication. I mean, Amazon is described as a difficult culture, but in some ways it's a culture that people either love or hate. And if you are willing to have direct conversations about things where people aren't meeting expectations, is really the only way to succeed. That particular story was one in which we had a foul-up in an organization that I ran, in which we started errantly sending emails suggesting people buy sexual lubricants via email, which was against our policy, and we got a lot of criticism for it. And
this is like people who've
right,
bought something
you bought,
like that.
You know, you bought this.
Would
so
you like
maybe
this
would you
other?
like this?
Yeah.
This. And Jeff, rightly so, kind of called me in on the carpet and some members of the team, and there's a session in there about showing, which is essentially in the book designed to show Jeff's absolute devotion to the customer and willingness to basically incur any short-term business expense in service to lifetime customer trust to him. And I think it's a really telling story, because at the end of the day, you know, it wasn't a financial decision about whether we would make more money selling these products in this particular way. To him, we would be successful without it. It was the erosion of customer trust shown by this breach of their private moment that mattered to him. And it was a very difficult one, and it was one of those ones where, like, you know, in some sense, my organization was responsible for it, and yet I didn't actually have any personal say in it. And so, you know, it's just the nature of an entrepreneurial culture is like you just have to own that and take responsibility. And we fixed it and lived to tell another day. But there were great lessons in there. You would have in any organization, you have these interpersonal lessons about how you interact with people and how your boss supports you or doesn't support you. And in that case, Jeff Wilkie was kind of the star of the show and brought us all together and put us on the right path. You know, those are lasting moments, and they happen in big companies and small companies, and it's that style of interaction that we hope to build, and that we have built already at Neva, in which people are kind of direct and honest with one another about the expectations of what we need to deliver for customers, and that's what matters.
So that's a perfect seg. So here we are at this point. So you've been on this incredible journey at what, 15 years or so at Amazon, right? Mm-hmm. Through from 6,000 people to 1 million, and you decide to join a very early stage startup with a very large mission. How many people are on the Neva team at this point?
We're less than 70. Right now?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So huge difference from 12,000. Tell me what I guess before I would like to understand some of the lessons from these large organizations that you're using in sort of helping build this organization now. But first, let's talk for a moment about what Neva is doing exactly, right. And you know, why it is such an audacious mission. Right. And
terrific.
Yeah.
So I left Amazon in the summer of last year. Just like many people in the pandemic, wanted to do something different. I had been doing the same thing for a long time. And I had gotten this bug to try something new. After marketing, I had been in supply chain and AWS, and I found that actually the change was the thing that really motivated me and challenged. I was reintroduced to Sridhar, who I mentioned earlier, and learned about what he and his co-founder, Vivek Raghunathan, were taking on at this company called Neva, and I was just captivated by it. And Neva, I don't presume you know, is plainly speaking, it's an attempt to build an alternative and very powerful consumer search engine. So we are literally going straight at this enormous market. Everyone searches. It's become a utility that everyone, you know, that I wager that everyone in this room, probably everyone in this room, has already searched once today. If you're like me, you search 10, 20, 50 times a day. And in this utility, there is only one player. And Google is a monopoly, 95% share, 95% share in the US and similar globally. It just doesn't make sense. Google has one model, terrific product, but it's one model. And it's an advertising supported model. When you're on Google, you are seeing ads by definition. And so when you have 93% share of any market and you only have one revenue stream, the only way you can continue to grow in the 30% range is to keep jacking that revenue stream up. And so Google Pages, where on commercial queries, can be up to, nowadays, are up to 50% ads, and sometimes it's very hard to see what those are ads. And when the ad is half of the product, you are the product. You are there, and you are receiving this terrific service, but it is nominally free. In fact, what you're seeing is not necessarily driven by you. And so our belief at Neva, and what Sridhar and Vivek set out to do, is to say, hey, there doesn't have to be that one model. There have been plenty of cases, in particular, in which these large, seemingly free advertising-supported models have been supplanted by, or if not supplanted by, have been augmented by a business model that is truly consumer-focused and is often subscription-based. So, the basic, obvious examples are things like HBO and Netflix, which took on network television by providing original content and customer-supported, totally customer-focused ways. And in Neva's case, we expect to build a search engine which will be better for you as a customer, as a user, than Google is. And we'll do it by providing extraordinary quality in ranking, extreme and radical transparency in terms of why you're seeing what you're going to see. And also, we will use those 50% of the pages, of the page, to create features and means for you to navigate the web that are entirely based on your interests and what your usage shows, not based upon what we need to show you in order to drive our advertising revenue. Neva is about, and will continue to be about, finding ways for you to navigate and consume the web, and now Web3 on your terms. And sometimes that means fewer searches, right? Getting you to the place where you need to go faster, without having to show you more and more search pages so that you'll see more and more ads. Mm-hmm. So we don't expect to take over Google's business, and there are plenty of challenger search engines out there now, but we believe in this model, and we believe over time we will build a great offering that people will be extremely happy to pay what will seem a nominal fee to have regular access across all of their devices.
So you mentioned HBO, you mentioned Netflix. I think of back in, I don't know what it was, 1999 or something, when The Sopranos started. And it was this thing that came out and everybody was talking about it, and you had to see this. I mean, you were just like not in the conversation if you hadn't seen this. House of Cards kind of did that for Netflix, right? Is there an imperative for something like that if you're trying to create, a feeling among people that they need to subscribe to this thing, is there an imperative to create something that they just must have? And what is that in the case of a Neva?
I think that would be, I don't know that it's absolutely required. I mean, you think about searching, again, you're doing it 30 times a day. And so on some level, it is just an accumulation of like, was my week in searching better than it would have been if I didn't have this great utility? And so every little search, not every search is going to be better on Neva. Like many will be, some won't be, but in aggregate, your experience, we hope, will be better. Whether that includes some sort of like, tentpole,
experience,
huge, like big hit. Yeah. This one thing that is just like everyone's talking about. I don't really know. We'll try for that. Certainly, it would be nice to have. But the truth of the matter is this use of search is so broad, and there's so many different outcomes that people are seeking, that just incremental improvement in so many areas is going to be successful over time. So I think the answer is, it remains to be seen. We're going to experiment, and we're going to let user interests and user behavior guide where we take it.
This kind of gets at what we were talking about earlier with this sort of notion of like extending an existing behavior or extending an existing position sort of in the funnel that somebody has, versus in the case of Neva, what you're doing right now, trying to create an entirely new behavior. Yeah. Are there other elements to that where you're sort of trying to incent people to subscribe to something that's an entirely new concept as a subscription?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I said about Prime earlier, and that's what makes the challenge of Neva or any other business of its sort, it's truly new, different, is that we don't enjoy this extraordinary volume of transactions that we could make better, because we don't have billions of searches that we could come and say, hey, would you like a better view of this? Would you like to subscribe to an upgrade of that? So that we don't have that luxury. So we have to build awareness in kind of more conventional brand marketing terms. We have to build awareness and consideration, and we have to target sets of people who are open to these sorts of changes, and we have to build excitement and sorts of features and positioning. It's important to note that there's another aspect of Neva that comes into play here is that it is private. Neva is not just an ad-free search model, but it is a completely private search model as well. So you don't, when you search on Neva, the ads that typically follow you around the internet based upon whatever it is you just searched on Google, they don't exist anymore. So we block trackers. What you search on Neva is entirely private. It's either between you and Neva in order to improve your experience, or you can actually you have settings in which you can have it just not be recorded in any fashion. So it's completely configurable and private. And so we have to find ways to reach people who care about these things and to build excitement. And so we do things like PR and broader marketing and kind of building organic features that help people propagate their interest in Neva from one to another.
To what extent is there sort of a coming battle here between, I think about DuckDuckGo has gotten a fair amount of attention in the last few years as alternative search. To what extent is there sort of an alternative search battle coming that we're going to see that Neva is really wading into among several other players?
Well, I suppose there is. There are multiple players out there who are trying this in some ways. I think it's worth noting that they all have really, really different approaches. This is an odd thing. Like, it's not like you've got like 1,000 different craft beers and they're all vying to be the one that sticks out. Like, there's literally one provider, and then there are a bunch of us who are coming after them in different ways. What's important to note about Neva is that the others are not really taking on the challenges of search. Neva is, those 60 to 70 people I'm talked to you about are building a search engine, a real search engine. There are actually only 2 real search engines, or the full guts of crawling and ranking, et cetera, today, which are Google and Bing. And most of those other competitors you talked about are decorations on top of that. I mean, DuckDuckGo is really just Bing, basically, with this privacy veneer on top of it. It's not a veneer. I mean, it's anonymous. Mm-hmm. It's anonymous search, but it is ad-supported. It's just a different model. It's a fundamentally different model.
Yeah. Okay, so I would love to talk about some of the other differences coming from these large organizations into this much smaller sort of insurgent organization. One big one that's obvious, I think, is hiring. I mean, I think you've got to look for an entirely different type of person, I'm guessing, and structure roles entirely differently. How do you think about that differently coming into this organization, and how are you bringing the experience from Amazon to how you're thinking about that at Neva?
Well, I've had to learn a lot. I think the most obvious difference for me is again just this lack of scale, and what I've described as the absence of the luxury of scale, which is at Neva, and I expect for most of the startups that any of you work at or think about, most of the roles are unique. Most of the people doing something are the only person doing that, whatever that thing is at Neva. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't move around. Like, everyone is doing everything. You're working on a lot of things. But if you're in charge of X at Neva, you're the person who really knows about X. And so when I'm trying to build the business team at Neva, each of these roles, it's almost a requirement to have someone who has bring some real domain expertise to that role because they have to teach us. They have to be the embodiment of that, whether it's, they have to be a social media manager, they have to be good at social media, right? You can't take someone who was in charge of something because they're smart and hope that they're going to learn because they don't have a team to teach themselves, like I talked to teach them, like I talked about earlier. And so, ironically, you have this general view that everyone is a generalist at a startup because everyone is kind of pitching in. But if you have a certain set of things that you need to accomplish, you really need experts, and in some sense, you need them more at a startup than you do at a large company.
That's interesting and kind of counterintuitive, but it makes perfect sense. That's interesting. I'm curious, in terms of sort of being a data-driven organization, a search engine has to be a extremely data-driven organization, I imagine. But you're operating at an entirely different scale there as well, and I wonder, are there interesting differences there in terms of how you can sort of make decisions based on data versus based on trying things and seeing what works?
Well, anyone who works in one of these large tech companies or customer-facing tech company is familiar with the notion of making changes and making decisions based on data and largely on experimental data. So Amazon, it won't surprise you, is a constant experiment. Every element of the user experience is constantly being tested in various configurations with no overall central organization of that. Each feature is being tested by different teams, and all these things are running nonstop behind the scenes. And the fundamental difference is that with scale comes statistical significance, right? So you can run hundreds and thousands of experiments on Amazon. We used to do things, and we would launch something at 9 in the morning. We'd have an answer at 10 in the morning. We'd know exactly what to do, and in fact, the algorithm will just move forward to the best outcome. In Neva, or any other startup, you have to pick those opportunities wisely because the time it takes something to come to resolution in terms of statistical confidence in an outcome, it can be much longer. You have fewer opportunities, fewer user flows, surfaces, and so you're really constantly making this decision. Is this something that is important enough for me to actually test? Do I really need a customer response on this, or is this just something I should do, or not even test it until such time as we have the luxury of more volume? Which
is sort of faster and nimbler. I mean, on one hand, you're talking about, in an organization like Neva, you can have this kind of the quote unquote like bias to action, right? Like to just try things and test them. In a large organization, you have the ability to gather vast amounts of data to make, really informed decisions, and get that data rather quickly. However, I wonder if sort of counterintuitively, the small organization is actually faster, even though you can have that data so quickly.
Yeah.
How does that stack up?
Well, I think it's all. I guess I would answer that by starting out and saying that there are also differences in terms of what you're doing, because in a larger organization, much more of what you're doing is optimization. Like you've got some sort of existing large thing, and it makes this many $100 millions, and so you want to do an experiment to see whether you can generate a 2 or 3% increase because that's worth so much money. But those things are not make or break. Whereas if in a small enterprise where you're just getting started and you're building the entirety of the user experience from whole cloth, the decisions you're making are in some sense more important for the future of the enterprise because they're just bigger. Like, are we going to offer this product or that product? Are we going to have this price or that price for our core model? And so those are things that you can move faster on. You can move faster on if you just kind of have a North Star to where you have to go. And some things you just say like, no, we can't. We're not going to test that because we believe that at our core, this feature has to exist on Neva, or it doesn't make sense for customers. Mm-hmm. And so I think It's a bit of a long answer, but I think it's empowering, and in some ways you just move faster because you can't test things.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I mean, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm also sort of thinking about the propensity for an organization to get caught sort of in the innovator's dilemma. And it's like, when you're describing what a large organization, which is just like optimizing, these like sort of incremental things, but within an existing lane,
Yeah.
that is sort of how large organizations get stuck,
Yeah.
right?
It is.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, how are we doing on time? How are we doing on, let's see if we have audience questions. Does anybody want to shout something out? Don't be shy. Yeah, go ahead. Great question.
Rather than paraphrase, let me just jump in. I'm assuming people heard. I'm going to answer that in two ways. On one level, there's a layer of essentially brand marketing that needs to occur at a place like Neva. We need to build awareness, and we need to find messages, and we believe we have them, that resonate with a particular set of people who are, and there is a sizable minority of people who are dissatisfied in some way with the search legacy, with the search option they have, the ad-supported search option they have in Google. And that is, we believe, is this combination of advertising, free and private, and the ability to essentially work with this challenger that is going to that is set out to making the internet a better place. We believe at the core, and this is a kind of core conceit, that the internet, where people have options of consuming it without advertising influence, will be a better internet, and will be a better internet for the people who choose it. And so getting that message home with the people who are receptive to it is critical. The other thing is important to note is coming from the other direction. I didn't even start with this, but it's also important. A lot of what I'm focused on and what the team is now focused on at Neva is not this, it's a subscription model, but how do we actually generate those sorts of trial that people are using Amazon? They were using and buying products on Amazon, and so it wasn't a stretch to get them to say, well, I should pay for Prime. So we don't want to just get people to wake up and decide that they need to subscribe to a search engine. We need to get them to try the search engine. And so a lot of what we're doing is really not just building the brand of Neva, but also building quantity of trial. And it's more than just trial. Our business model is actually not just a subscription model. We have a free basic tier of Neva, which is ongoing. So you don't have to pay for Neva. You can get access to a full-featured access to Neva's core features up to a limit simply with an account and no requirement to pay. And so our expectation is over time we will build more and more usage, and because it is a product, it's an offering and an experience that does take some time for people to understand at the value. And so our belief is that when people start with a basic account at Neva, which there's no, you can get one today, and you can try it out yourself and then and install it as your search engine. And over time, you'll say, this is really worth it. And then we offer a set of other benefits in addition to unlimited usage. We offer some really interesting insider benefits and third-party privacy-related benefits that are helpful. The final thing, and coming back to it, is I think it's also important for us to make sure that people understand that the right group of people, the target group of people, truly does understand the cost of what they perceive to be free search. And so a fair amount of what we do at Neva is to try to educate people on the tracking that goes on, the extraordinary level of tracking that goes on when you are participating in the Google ecosystem. We have our extension blocks trackers, and we make it clear how much you're being tracked if you weren't using Neva. I think we need to build better experiences to kind of bring to light just how much of the page you're seeing is actually ads all the time you search. So it's kind of all of those things, like why is there a better option? Why do you actually need a better option? Here's a way to try the better option, and here's how you should really connect with it on a personal level and why you should believe in it.
Talk about building a better internet as part of that answer at the beginning of that. Is there sort of a broader movement to build a better internet that you sort of try to tap into that's part of the answer to that question as well?
It would be, I think, presumptuous of me to say that we are kind of in any sort of leadership role in building a better internet, but I will say that it feels to me like we're at this moment where people are recognizing more broadly that there is real cost to this thing that we've developed, that we've been allowed to develop with so much power concentrated in such a small set of hands, with a core set of business models that require them to use consumers in a way to further their necessary corporate economic needs that have an impact. And so I think there are a lot of people out there who are dealing with that right now. And I think you see a lot of this big tech backlash is really just a realization that, whoa, there was this big, broad, sprawling thing, and now the power is really, really concentrated. And that may not be the best thing.
Yeah. We have a question right there. Yeah.
Building a better internet seems extremely effort, but you're going against a very large behemoth, right? Which seems incredibly daunting. So I'm curious, how do you define success?
One day at a time, What's the, eat an elephant one bite at a time. It's just like the Neva Canon will be successful with I think you would say what you would think might be a shockingly small footprint on a percentage basis, because the market that we're participating in, that we seek to participate in, which plainly speaking is the global market for search, a global utility, is so extraordinary and enormous. And so, the numbers of users for Neva that would be successful is in the, tens and hundreds of millions. It's not in the billions. We don't have to. Neva will be, and other search engines, and other competitor search engines, we welcome them, will be extremely successful in the single-digit percentages if necessary. But all you have to do is look at the scale of Google's business to understand that 10% of Google's business is a bigger business than most of the companies that are on these stages this week. But all of them, frankly. It's daunting, but they have challenges as well, because they, as I've just outlined, they have things that they can and can't do constitutionally based upon their market position, and so that leaves it open to challengers. And And if you really, really just focus, and this is the biggest lesson for me at Amazon, is like, if you really, really focus on customers, and you build for customers, and you listen to customers, and you are absolutely religious about who you're inventing for, then good things will happen. And that's what we intend to do.
Go here first.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about streaming wars and sports rights. What is your opinion about Amazon and Apple acquiring MLB games, NFL games, to create a biggest system about streaming wars? I'd like to hear your opinion.
The question is about streaming wars and Amazon and Apple's battles to acquire content first of all, just to be clear, I had an extraordinary experience at Amazon, and I'm as obviously as you can tell, I'm very, very fond of the company. I am not an expert in those things, so I'm happy to talk about them, but it's just as a private citizen. It's not due to any sort of insight. I was around and was a central participant in the whole adding Prime Video to the Prime offering and the building of Prime Video, although I can't claim any sort of personal responsibility for it. But I will say a common thread in all of these things is if you're going to have a media offering, then content is king, and you have to. And there's a certain set of content that is a zero sum. Like there's only one NFL, and it is a way to get people to your service, whatever that service is, because there are some people who need to watch the NFL, or whatever that single thing is, or the horseback riding championships, or whatever. And if you have it, then you get access to those people, and that's, I'm sure, the nature of those games. And with this many. In a world where HBO was the only game in town, and now there's Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and and Paramount Plus and any number of these other things, obviously with demand comes competition for precious supply, and I'm not surprised that they're battling over it. It makes perfect sense.
Did you have a question? Yeah.
Your point before about creating, recognizing the product and utility, and I was just thinking about the analogous example of SaaS products and grudge purchases, say, accounting software and things like that. So is there some sort of, reach into that sort of logic there?
Well, I think the question is, are there analogies between if I can get it right, is the recognition of the differences in product in these consumer spaces versus SaaS products like accounting space or something like that. I would say that the common thread is that in almost all these cases we're talking about a zero-sum choice. Like, most people are not going to have two pieces of accounting software, just like they're not going to use two search engines all that much. Some will, but mostly they won't. And so the key for anyone in any of these businesses is to find a way before the commitment to get someone to understand the fundamental differences in your product and to value and to feel really confident in their choice, or to have the choice be really, really lightweight. I think in accounting software, again, I've never installed one, but my expectation is it's hard. Like, you don't want to just install one today and then maybe install a different one tomorrow. Like, that's not like it's not like a search engine. You can just try it. And so building experiences that allow someone to make a decision with supreme confidence that they're not going to have to go back on a bunch of work that they just did. So whatever it is, to provide some sort of lightweight trial or experience that allows them to see how things will be better for them if they use your product than the one that they're already using is critical. And it's critical for us as well.
We're basically out of time. I have one last really quick question. As somebody who's worked in the subscription economy for most of your career in different kinds of products, to what extent do you guys worry about subscription fatigue at a moment when there are a number of businesses sort of trying to provide that alternative?
Like all of you, right? I have a bunch of different things, all of which seem to charge me somewhere between $4 and $10 a month out there, and keeping track of them all is hard.
Or $19.99.
Yeah, or $19.99. And so Neva, by the way, I've never mentioned, is $4.95 a month or $49.95 a year. So we think of it as a very, very modest investment in something that you do all the time. I think that there probably someone will figure this out, and that I would expect that there will be some sort of a kind of meta subscription product that allows you to kind of configure and pay for all of your monthly stuff all in one place. That would make some sense. There are analogies to that in other spaces.
Subscribing to the internet, basically.
Yeah. But that's hard to do also, because so many of these things are people have invested in those direct relationships, and they are and you know, they're competitors who are pitted against one another, so they don't often want to play nicely.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. I wish we could keep going. Great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for coming.